Well, this is going to be interesting, Fred. Some of it may be true, but you're looking at two geezers, and I happen to know Frank's birth date because we flew into Canada a few times. So when you cross the border, you got to have the birth date and the passport number and that stuff. So Christmas Eve of 1924, in this little farm area in Alberta, is when Frank came along. He beat me by about 7 years. Anyhow, in the following years, Frank took to this guy pretty early on, and we celebrated that, and our featured pilot for Frank in 2012, actually, at the airport, at the Roy Franklin Museum. And and Frank and I have a lot in common in terms of our interest in aviation and experiences. Frank, you've had more than mine, and really interesting ones. We both shared a lot of glider flying, and that pretty much was, well, when you were 17, your dad sent you away to Edmonton with a $5 bill and said, go get a job. And you found a job the next day at the local airport, so you were at an airport early on.
Well, actually, John, my first job was with a photographer this activity of Fred's here sort of reminds me of that, in that this particular photographer made his business was selling pictures of babies. He'd go into the house and take a picture of the baby and then sell it to the owner of both the house and the baby. And my first occasion with him on doing this, we were in there working for probably an hour to 2 hours, trying to get the baby set up. Like Fred has the difficulty here getting us set up. And when it's all through, I said, when we got out of the house, I said, well, how do you think the pictures turned out? He said, I didn't turn the camera on because he said I knew she wouldn't be able to buy it.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's your first job?
That's my first job.
How old were you then?
I'd be about 19 or about 17.
Is this just before you went to Edmonton?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this happened in Edmonton.
Okay.
This situation did.
Okay.
And so I thought, I didn't like that business at all.
That job didn't go anywhere. No future.
I held that job for about 1 week. And then there was an ad in the paper about training activities of the Royal Air Force at an airport south of Edmonton, just north of Calgary, an elementary flying training school. So I looked into that and got hired to go down there and record data on students' flight times and so forth. And so I did that, stayed there for about a year. And I wanted to go to school and become an aeronautical engineer.
Even then?
None of the universities taught aeronautics then in my area. So I thought I'd go to one of the schools in the U.S. And so I had to earn more money than I was earning at the flying training school. So I went and applied in Edmonton for the Alaska Highway. And I got a good paying job going up on the Alaska Highway.
You were inventorying heavy equipment?
Yeah, but I was inventorying, first of all, I was inventorying with a group of other kids about the same age as myself, which was just be below the military sign-up age of 18.
Yeah.
And so I applied for the job with the Public Roads Administration, who were then working on the highway, and got a job auditing what came in on the trains, because the trains run as far north as Dawson Creek. And we would make sure everything was there where it was supposed to be there, coming from the mainland. And then the Public Roads Administration, U.S. Public Roads Administration, got out of this job of building a military highway and turned it all over to the Corps of Engineers. So then I hired the Corps of Engineers to pick me up and took me into their arms and used me to cruise up and down the highway, auditing bridge materials and stuff like that to make sure there was enough materials as they needed them along the highway.
Yeah.
So they gave me a van, Chevy van truck for transportation, and so I had this all to myself and would drive up and down the highway and had some interesting experiences in doing that. And I guess one of the most interesting was in about 40 below zero weather, I was over 100 miles south of Fort Nelson, and my engine stalled. There was water in the fuel, and the water froze as it came into the carburetor, and I couldn't get it started. So I thought I was probably going to freeze to death. So I curled up in the cab to try and stay as warm as I could, and after
Not much traffic.
there was zero traffic until finally one vehicle, one 6x6 military truck came along and saw my problem, and they had a short chain, probably 12, 15 feet long, and they hooked me to the back of the truck with a short train and towed me to Fort Nelson, and where I got my truck fixed and so forth and got warmed up again. But, and then, well, I should have said that this all started because I had a good high school friend with me when we got our jobs done at the flying school, and he got into the Canadian Air Force, and I had tried the Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Army, and the Canadian Navy, but because of my left arm, that I buggered up when I was a kid, riding horseback, and a horse fell on me. I couldn't get into the military. And I guess the other side of that coin is my friend got in, and he ended up as an air gunner, and he flew one mission and got shot down over Hamburg, and they lynched him when he got on the ground.
Really?
And so I really had a better result, I guess, or finish than that poor guy did.
When was your first flight in an airplane?
My first flight...
Was that out of Edmonton?
I started my training out of Edmonton. That was in 19... I should get my logbooks. But 1946. I had gone to technical school in California, came back to Edmonton and got an engineering job at the airport, and with a small outfit called Aircraft Repair that was designing modifications for Bush airplanes, and I got a job there, and so I thought I better start flying, which I wanted to do, and so I joined the Edmonton Flying Club, and flew can't think of the name. side-by-side two-seater fleet Canuck it was called.
Oh, yeah, that neat biplane. Isn't it a
Pardon?
biplane?
No, it was not a biplane,
The
no.
fleet?
Pardon?
The fleet.
Yeah. There's a fleet Finch. It was
Oh.
a biplane, but this is something like a Cessna 120.
Oh, okay.
And I flew that, and then they also had a Aeronca Champ.
Yeah,
So I flew the Aeronca Champ and
yeah.
the Fleet Canuck, and I got solo in about 8 hours.
Yes.
And then there was on that job probably in Edmonton for less than a year, and an ad came out in the paper for wanting air engineers to join AV Row in Toronto, who is an English company,
Yes.
because he won a contract from the Canadian government to design and build a jet intercity transport.
Mm-hmm.
And so myself and several other guys who worked with me in the aircraft repair design office decided we would apply and see if they'd hire us. Well, they did. They hired us all. It was about 3 of us. And so we got on the train and headed for Toronto and got a job there. And I ended up designing the wing to fuselage joint on this jet transport, a picture of which is in my office down there, foreign jet transport. And it was 1 week shy of being the first commercial jet transport to fly in the world.
Huh.
The French Caravelle, I believe it was called, beat us by 1 week.
Huh.
And this is it was a good airplane.
Yeah.
We had to change engines before we finished the design, because we started off with Rolls-Royce Avons, where 2 engines were enough thrust for it, but the military thought that there was enough technology that should be classified to keep out of the hands of Russia and so forth. So they refused to let us use that engine on the airplane. And so the guy who was our chief engineer came back from England, and he wanted us to look at putting some Derwents on. The Derwents were about 3,500 pounds thrust each, whereas the Avon was about 6,000 pounds thrust. So we redesigned it and put Derwents on, and did all our flight test work and whatnot. And then along came the Korean War, and we hadn't finished. The airplane was flying and being demonstrated. Howard Hughes, who was then the owner of Trans World Airlines, was very interested in it. So he wanted to borrow the airplane and evaluate it. So we sent our crew and the airplane down to him. He had that down in L.A. And then the Canadian government, because the Korean War was on, wanted all our effort put onto a twin jet fighter, which had been started in parallel but behind the jet liner. And so that program ended up being essentially canceled because no government support. So I then transferred over onto the fighter program, and had very interesting experiences there. And I also had resumed flying in the Toronto area.
Now this is in gliders now, right?
It's gliders primarily at the start. Yeah, I joined the glider club at the in Toronto.
Now tell us how you met Sandra, and your friend Frank Woodward met Marlene, and how that relates to flying gliders.
Well, we were all young and in Chargers.
Yeah.
And we liked to party at the airport.
Yeah.
Our group did. And we were going to have a New Year's Eve party,
Yeah.
but we lacked nurses, and lacked women, I should say. There were a few couples coming, but the rest were all bachelors. And so I got elected along with a French kid
Yeah.
to go to the residence of the nurses training area in Brantford to see if any of the nurses would like to join us.
Yes.
So we went down there, this French guy and myself, and talked to the matron of where the girls stayed. And so she said, well, we'll have to have one of the ladies talk to you about whether they want to come or not. So we were given information that when to come back, so came back, and Sandra was one of the people nominated to evaluate us. And
Big job.
so anyway, it turned out that about 4 of the nurses
Yeah.
came to our party.
No, 6 nurses.
Six
nurses.
Six
I
nurses
see sign language
Yeah.
from.
came to our party.
Yeah.
And after the next day after the party, we were out in the snow on the airport,
Yeah.
launching gliders and giving the gals a ride
Yeah.
before their long ride came. And it ended up that
Yeah.
was it 3 or 4 of these nurses got married to guys in our group.
From that party.
Sandra married me, yeah. Frank Woodard married one of the nurses.
3.
Marlene, she married Frank.
Yeah.
And then one married the German guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Anyway, about four got married, all within very close time frame.
And you, Frank, Sandra, and Marlene are still married all
Yeah.
this more than half century later.
Yeah.
And the Woodwards were on this island for a number of years,
Yeah.
but they're over in Mount Vernon now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the gals Sandra in particular, spent a large part of her life chasing me in the glider.
Yes,
Then-
as crew,
As crew,
as,
because
as unpaid crew.
they were well paid, well reimbursed.
Oh, I see.
But
Well, tell us about the most interesting retrieve. You call them retrieves, right?
yeah,
That Sandra might have done for you when you're out in some plowed field or somewhere.
well, I think it would be on a flight
Yeah.
we made in Canada. We towed our glider from Toronto to Regina in Saskatchewan
Uh-huh.
for a Canadian National Soaring Contest,
Yeah.
which I entered. And on one flight, we crossed the border, landed at a place in in the oil fields anyway, and
But not on an airport,
no, in a field.
in a field.
And,
Okay.
and what they did then, we didn't have radio,
Yes.
so what they'd do is go and place a collect call back to the airport where we came from.
Yeah.
And the rules up there then, collect calls, if they weren't answered, were no charge.
Uh-huh.
So they'd put in a call directly to me at that number, and somebody would pick up the phone and say, well, Frank's not here. So hang up, or Sandra might ask if you heard from him. And he might say, well, yeah, we have heard from him, and tell her where we were and where she might contact us by
Yeah.
phone.
Yes.
So then she'd go and buy
Then try and describe that, please.
borrow a phone and call to locate you. Anyway, she went all through that and found me in the field. And so we had to take the glider apart and
Yeah.
load it into the trailer, and
Yeah.
tow back home again for the next day's soaring.
Yeah.
So Sandra saw a lot of this. I think probably the roughest was when we had our glider based in Edwards out in the desert there in California. And when we lived in California for a while, we had our glider out there, and Sandra and the twin girls would retrieve me there, and that was pretty hot climate to work in.
Well, talking about retrieves and crews, crews don't last very long. Jean crewed for me, and my sister crewed for me, I think maybe twice in eastern Washington, and but they were always busier after that, and it was hard to get anyone except another glider pilot when you called back to Freda, if anyone's there still late in the day. They might be able to drive your trailer out if you can describe where it is. But one of the ones I remember is at first when I landed in this great big plowed field in eastern Washington, and it looked just so good, I'll just land in the middle of that, right? Well, no. So you find, I soon learned that you better land close to that barbed wire fence, which is right next to the road, because otherwise you're pulling the bird across these furrows all the way to that fence alone, and etc. So there are a whole lot of things to think about. It's not just landing in a field. There can be things to think about.
Oh,
Anyhow,
we had one occasion where we had the farmer says, "You're not taking that glider out of the field because you'll damage my crop," and he wanted so much money to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. Only one like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you towed gliders too.
Yeah, towed gliders is a way of. I towed gliders before I was flying gliders. And
With the tiger moth.
The tiger moth, and also fleet finch and
Yeah.
a couple other airplanes, but mostly tiger moth. At 90 horsepower. Installed in Aranca. We had 90 horsepower Aranca, which made an excellent tow plane. But mostly it was a tiger moth. And I put in a whole day of towing and on weekends. You had to have a tow pilot. We'd have people would drive over to Wenatchee to soar, and there'd be no tow pilot there.
Yeah.
So I was a glider pilot, but I also towed, and so I'd spend my half day there when I got there towing gliders, and I'd do up to about 10 tows in an afternoon.
Yeah.
Tow gliders to 2,000 feet, and then they pick up a thermal and they're on their way.
And from that open area out of Toronto there, where your glider club was based, you made 6 different flights from country that's not very good soaring country across the border to Elmira, New York, in your single-place glider. Tell us the time you were intercepted at the border.
Well, we were intercepted. Well, generally speaking,
You and your airplane.
yeah.
Yes.
Generally speaking,
Generally.
the border patrol people were very nice people,
Yes.
and the climate wasn't like it is today, and they generally required, the border patrol did, was you to give them a call if you flew into the country illegally. Give them a call, tell them where you were, and they would fix it up. This particular flight, I was just crossing the border, and a jet airplane comes at me, and orbits around me for a bit, and I turn around. I know what the message is: to get the hell out of here.
Right.
And
Like a 180.
yeah, and do a 180 and head back north.
Yeah.
Which I did, and he'd have to go back to get fuel anyway. So then after he disappeared from sight, heading back to the airport at Buffalo, I turned around and head south again.
Yes.
And he'd come zooming up again and orbit me and give me the message to get back. So I'd turn north and he'd head for home again. I did it about 3 times and he gave up and I went on to Elmira.
He was going to run out of gas. You weren't.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a great relationship with people down in Elmira that were Schweitzer Aircraft
Yeah.
manufactured gliders and sailplanes. And they always made us very much at home when we showed up down there.
Frank was a good enough glider pilot to go to the Nationals in Canada, and you qualified and went to the World Soaring Championships in the mid-50s. Tell us about that. And when you got over there, you had to have a glider to fly, but you were given one.
We were loaned one.
Yes.
Which was through the auspices of Hannah Reich. Hannah is sort of well known from World War II activities and whatnot. She was a pilot that flew the one rocket fighter that the Germans had. She was a test pilot for that because she was small and lightweight. She was an ideal choice for some of that stuff. And anyway, she got word that one of the Canadians was without a sailplane. There were 2 of us nominated to go. Jack Ames, he got a French sailplane, and Hannah rustled up a German sailplane. It was a prototype Gaia, G-I-E-R sailplane, and I got there and had it for a week to practice with before the contest, and so I practiced with it, and then the contest started, and they weren't particularly strong soaring conditions at Saint Yann in southern France. And on one occasion, or in that area, they were cloud seeding the clouds to get rain out of the clouds. And I can remember on one contest day, we all sat on the ground hoping to hell that one of these would build into a good-sized cumulus to get us a start in the meet. And that happened. Finally,
A big Q-nim.
huge cumulus floated over the area, and we all launched. There were about 20 sailplanes launched, and just about every one of them went into that queue, that big CB. And we climbed up in that thing, and I saw a fin go by me once in the soup. And but we were young and not too smart.
Yeah.
And so we got launched. But that was about all the lift we got, and so it was a question of a long glide. How far could we glide out to get maximum points?
And you were IFR.
We broke out of the IFR when we came out of the cloud. But
wow.
But then most of the flights in the contest were over mountains, which to me then were foreign. I was not used to soaring in the mountains, and the best distances were made over the mountains. And Paul McCready of the U.S. team won the contest, and he made a flight. I landed in the mountains at a suitable place in the mountains, and Paul made it right down to the coastline of the Mediterranean, and.
Wow. Shifting gears, you've had so many different experiences, and so many were serendipitous. You know, how can this happen? But your favorite airplane for many years was the CB. When you were living on Lake Sammamish, you had this CB, and when you went to get that CB, what was its number?
607, November 7, 6070.
Yes.
And that was my Social Security number, the last 4 digits of it.
Yeah.
And that airplane there's another fellow who lived on Lake Sammamish, there were two others who had seaplanes, and I made it known that I wanted to find one, a good CB, and this fellow who, well, I don't know whether he found it for me or not, but I think he was the guy who did find it. Anyway, he came back and told me that he flew for United Airlines, and he said there was one in Chicago for sale. It was really a nice bird, and if he'd like, he'd fly it back from Chicago for me. So anyway, we negotiated the price with the owner back there, and paid.
You haven't seen it yet?
No, I hadn't seen it. And bought it on the strength of the word of this United Airline pilot.
Yeah.
And anyway, he had to, interesting, on his way back with the CB, he landed on the road several times to taxi to a service station to gas up. But when he got to
yeah. And you flew that airplane for years.
Yeah,
Right.
and when he got to Yakima,
Yeah.
maybe it was anyway, Yakima or Wenatchee. He couldn't get over because of the weather, so he and I drove over as soon as the weather turned okay, and showed up at the airport. And when he pointed the airplane out to me, tied up on the tie-down line. And I said, that airplane was built for me. And he said, how do you know? I said, it's got my social security number on it, 6070.
Amazing.
And it was a good bird. Had it for years. And in hindsight, I wish I'd have kept it till today, because we made some very nice flights in it. It was a wallowing goose. It wasn't a pleasant airplane to fly, but it was a great bird on the water. You could take it into rough water that a Grumman twin engine couldn't take, and so it was a good bird. And we flew it to Vancouver Island, all up down there and down the west coast of British Columbia, and we landed on the edge of a lake, put our gear down, and taxi right up and make camp for the night. The two girls and Sandra and I have a campground, and great life, and really a reflexible machine. I did have a problem with it. A friend of mine, Rudy Parpart, is did a lot of flying with me. We were landing at the airport south of on Whidbey Island, south of the Whidbey Naval Air Station.
Oak Harbor.
Oak Harbor, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a narrow strip.
35 feet.
And 30 feet, and it's sort of uphill, landing to the east.
With tricky crosswinds.
And Rudy was in the left seat.
Yeah.
I wanted to check him out, but I had no rudder pedals in the right seat, but I had lots of confidence in Rudy anyway. He's a good pilot. And so we're coming in to land uphill.
Yeah.
And touched down, and Rudy lost directional control of the bee.
Yeah.
And we ground looped, tore one gear off, bent the spar on one wing, and Rudy had his A&P, so we rented a hangar down at Snohomish and made that our shop. And we worked for a year, he and I, rebuilding that airplane, doing all the work on weekends, and got it completely redone again. I had to do the analysis of the repair for the FAA to demonstrate that it was structurally sound after we fixed things. And but we did, and got back to flying it again. But then I got a taste for some new airplanes I hadn't tried. It's like Cessna 180 and Cessna 182s. And so I had some experience with them and enjoyed it and enjoyed my partners and so forth. But it's a great life. I reckon I couldn't have done anything that would give me more enjoyment, particularly looking back on, than what I experienced. It was really a great life.
Now,
Now, John, I got to ask you some questions.
well, we've talked about, okay.
Yeah. What motivated you to get into flying?
Oh, well, I grew up as a kid in World War II, and Goleta, where you worked for a couple of years in, the 50s or so, it's about 10 or 12 miles north of Santa Barbara. I grew up in Santa Barbara. Goleta was a very active Marine Air Base. And that airport is now Santa Barbara's airport, but all the rest of the land around it is UC Santa Barbara. But anyhow, as a teenage kid, I would see Douglas Dauntlesses and Hellcats and all these great airplanes go overhead all the time, and they were pretty low because they were going to go back to Goleta there. So I just loved that, and I followed the war in detail, and I wanted to get old enough to join. So I was interested in airplanes, and like so many built models, and I had a free flight, beautiful 4-foot wingspan, and my thing was just, I didn't like U-control, and I just fill up the gas tank and launch them, put the rudder over a little bit, and they'd climb like that. And I lost that really good one took me a month to find it. It was in a field about 4 miles away. It had climbed up almost out of sight and gone with the wind, and finally found it though. But so I was always looking at airplanes, and when I went away to college, I went to Princeton and joined the Naval ROTC right away, and finished in '52, and obviously I was going to go to flight training. My eyes were 20/15, both eyes. I'd never worn glasses, so it's obvious I've got to go to Pensacola and go through this big eye exam, and I flunked it. Too much astigmatism. So then I ended up on a destroyer for 3 years during Korea, and screening carriers and going out launch behind them, and every now and then picking a pilot up with like a cold cat. Have you heard of cold cats? A cold cat is a catapult launch where it doesn't work, and the airplane goes in the water, and if it avoids getting run over by the bow of the carrier, and if the guy gets out of the airplane, you can pick him up. So anyhow, I missed the flying early on. In medical school, I went to UC San Francisco, and as a junior in medical school, I saw a sign on the freeway south of San Francisco, learn to fly for $99. So big billboard at San Carlos. So I went there, and 7 hours later in a 172 I soloed. Then I was out of money and couldn't fly for the next 4 years, but after that I flew continuously since then. So I've always been interested in aviation and followed especially the military stuff in World War II very actively. Now you haven't told us about your engineering part, because you were sent by, was it Douglas, or to Canterbury University in England, which was the equivalent of...
No, when I finished Curtis Wright in the war, I went to work for Douglas.
Yeah.
And I came back for vacation.
Yeah.
Because my family was still in Alberta. And I came back when war was declared over. And I got a wire from Douglas saying that I needn't return because they were going to be laying people off.
Yes.
And I would be one of those who would be laid off if I came back because I hadn't seniority with them at all. So I then took the job in Edmonton. It was now at a different name and a little more sophisticated engineering. And went down to 1946. I went to Toronto and got a job with Aviators and
Yes.
and on the Mach 2 fighter. Oh, no, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm screwed up. When I went to college in England after I finished the
Yeah.
work in Edmonton and ended up in the college in England, when I came back, I ended up working on a Mach 2 fighter.
Yes.
And after several years, having rebuilt about 6 of them, only flew one. And the contract was canceled because the Canadian government feared the threat of the Russians attacking over Canada was not a big problem at that time. And so they canceled the Aero program. And so then I got an offer from Curtis Wright. And we went down there, and I think I said earlier, they closed that down after about a year and wanted us to go back to New Jersey. And we had lived in the eastern part of the country, like at Toronto, where the summers were hot and humid a lot of the time. And we were Westerners. And I was a Westerner, Sandra wasn't. And so we enjoyed being in Santa Barbara, but it got closed, and so I got an offer from Boeing. Boeing were down there searching for engineers, and I got an offer and came up to Seattle to see them. And when we got to Seattle, we were overwhelmed with the beauty of the area. And we weren't enthused about the wet winters, but we thought this beauty was great. And we had also been interviewed by a company in San Diego, and had to meet him downtown in Seattle to talk about a job there. But as it turned out, we accepted the Boeing job, and I went to Boeing, and that was a great experience, a great company.
Yeah.
And I ended up as manager of high-speed flight. I led studies on supersonic transports and one thing I ought to say out of my whole career that I'll never forget, when I was at Avro, I was chief of technology, and the chief of flight test invited me to go one day I had one ride in the jet fighter. We were the target for another one, so we flew and as a target for another CF-100, and they calibrated their radar and whatnot. But anyway, Don Rogers, who was chief of flight test, invited me one day to go for a ride in the CF-100 and put me in the front seat and let me fly the airplane. And we were crossing over de Havilland Field at about 300 feet in Toronto after takeoff, and he said, "Stall it." Well, I would imagine it to be a vicious stall, and I wasn't enthused about that at all, but I did it, and it stalled just like an Aranca champion would stall. Yeah.
Did you lose much altitude?
No. And he says, "Roll it."
Really?
He said, I did an aileron roll. And God, I felt like a world beater.
Oh,
The airplane was so simple and solid, and that's a point in my life I'll never forget.
that reminds me of, what year was it? Was it the 727 or something that the Boeing, who's that guy, Tex, who rolled
Tex
that
Bouillon, no,
airplane?
Tex Johnson.
Yeah,
Yeah,
over Seattle, over Boeing.
yeah, yeah. We're at the big boat contest.
Yeah,
Boats. What do they call that weekend? Anyway,
yeah, right,
anyway, he rolled it over that,
right.
and he had practice. So a friend of mine, Jim Gannett, was in the right seat when he did that.
That, yes.
And Jim said they were out practicing it and knew pretty well what to do when they rolled it. No problem to them, but the president of Boeing at that time called Tex on the carpet and said one more activity like that, and he's on his own because of the gamble of if what had happened if the airplane had not done that,
Yes.
if it had broken up or something like that. But the pilots were pretty sure of what they were doing.
Yeah, pretty amazing. You were with Boeing for 30, how many years?
Boeing from, I retired in '97,
Yeah,
and I got the job with Boeing in about 47 or something like that.
with Boeing.
Yeah,
It was,
60,
yeah,
60.
it was way over 30 years.
Senator,
You got the job with Boeing at 60, in 1960?
60.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
about 35 years plus,
He worked for Boeing for 27 years.
27 years.
27.
Yeah.
27
Yeah.
years, that's it.
It's a good company.
Yeah, yeah.
Great people there. Enjoyed them all. I have some souvenirs up in the office there of a supersonic program where the guys, the art group prepared this and had all the guys sign it to remember them on it. And
Yeah.
now you're in medicine. That's a different field. You were in charge of this School of Medicine at the U.
Well, I was chairman of the Department of Family Medicine
Okay.
at the medical school for 14 years, yeah. Yeah, my time in medicine is actually at 60 years this year since I started medical school, 60. And I did 4 years of medical school at UC San Francisco, then interned at LA County when it was the second biggest hospital in the country, second only to Cook County. 3,500 beds we had then, and great experience. Then 2 years of general practice residency in Santa Rosa, Sonoma County Hospital, then 6 years of practice at Mount Shasta, country town, Gene taught school. We had our 3 boys there in elementary school, and then went into teaching for 20 plus years, and then came up here in 90. Actually, we met Frank and Marlene and Sandra. Gene and I met Sandra and Marlene at, what's the name of
The donut shop.
The donut shop downtown. We had just arrived and we were looking for a house, and we heard you talking behind us. And so we met, and we met shortly after that, Frank. But that was 87. We rented a place for 3 years and bought our place here on the west side, just back here a ways. And we're there for 21 years or so, and then moved to town. But I practiced here for 7 years in the 90s, and then since 97, I worked pretty much full-time on research and writing on healthcare. So, and I've enjoyed the flying as part of being in medicine a lot. Early on in Mount Shasta, we could take the family down to the city, in the 182, a club airplane, an old straight tail 182. When I was in practice, I could fly down to Reading, 65 miles, and assist in surgery at a hospital there near Benton Field, and fly back and be back in the office later in the morning. So at UC Davis, we were there 5 years. I'd fly up and down the valley, setting up residency programs and use the club airplane. The university had a flying club then, out of University Field in Davis. That was great. So I've always used flying. I flew from this island down to UW lots of times, many years, and had first a Citabria and then a Maul M5 on, I'd be on straight floats for 6 months and keep it at Sportsman's Lake. And then I'd go to, in October, I'd go into Renton and get it back on wheels and fly it out of the airport during the winter. That was always great sport. And but going into, you've heard the story from Dennis Willows at some of our previous meetings. Dennis had a dock down at Fisheries there on, just there at the university on Portage Bay. And I would call Dennis and see if he was going to be in there. It could handle one float plane. So if I went down tomorrow or the next day, I'd make sure that was available. We coordinated that always. But it was never his float. He flew from the Friday Harbor Labs to his place down there at Fisheries, and that with that dock for like 30 years or so. And the administrators in his department always thought it was his dock. It wasn't his dock. And they'd come up and ask him, you know, we want to do this to it, and fix it up this different way. And he'd think about it a little while, and that's okay. So, yeah, so he had as much fun commuting by floats to UW as I did. Yeah.
One thing, John,
Yeah.
your flying career is
Yeah.
much more complete than mine. You have flown a lot of hang gliders.
Yeah, I did that.
And I didn't have that experience, but I crewed for you a number of times
That's
on hang
true.
gliders.
That's true.
And where was that place up towards Bellingham where we flew off the...
Yeah, Mount Blanchard.
Yeah.
Mount Blanchard is 1,300 feet, and it's on the road up that, next to the water, the road up to Bellingham, and that's an active soaring, no, hardly soaring site, but it's an active hang glider site, and that's where my first solo was. I did one tandem ride on a 3,500 foot mountain with another guy, and then I got my glider and I drove it up to the top of Mount Blanchard.
And I helped you several times.
And you helped as crew, very important. And then the big thing about launching a hang glider is to, once you decide you're going to go, you've got to run hard and you cannot abort. And there are all those fir trees down there a little ways, and there's the water out there, and you better launch and not trip on your way. And so, yeah, I had one flight where, I mean, the trouble with hang gliding is in learning it, there's not much dual instruction, and it's all weight shift, and it's counterintuitive if you're a pilot. So I launched one day off of that 1,300 feet, and you got to get all the way down to that farm field. It's, I don't know, 3 miles away or 4 or something. And so somehow I got in a turn. Well, I had never gotten in a turn before. So, okay, I'll come around and do a 360. Well, I was losing much more airspeed. Well, no, I was gaining airspeed and losing altitude. I'm not going to make that farmer's field. And all I see down there is trees. Well, there's a little pond down there. Maybe I can get there. And I'm losing all kinds of altitude in this turn because I was doing the wrong thing on the weight shift, which is opposite the airplane. And okay, now I'm going to kill myself in 10 seconds if I don't do something right soon. So here's this little pond, and now I'm real close, and I see it's been logged off, and there are all these little stumps out of that pond, about 2 feet high. By now, I land in the water. Right now, I miss the stumps, and I can stand up in the pond. I pull my glider out, and go talk to some guy nearby and call the place where everyone else is. But anyhow, yeah, so that was my worst time on a hang glider. But I had a number of flights of 2 hours in ridge lift down near Rainier. Dog Mountain is a neat place. It has its own lake. And it makes its own weather, and you can soar off of that in ridge lift for 2.5 hours and see Rainier every time you turn around and look back at it. And so I had some great experiences too.
There's one phase that neither one of us have touched yet, and that is because we didn't experience it, but now these people jumping out with no parachutes.
No, I never wanted to.
25,000 feet
Yeah.
free falling. Of course, they've got these suits on that
Yeah,
where their arms held out, and they're sort of like a Delta airplane in shape.
yeah.
But I don't know how they slow down and get their sink rate down low enough so it's safe to land. But do you know how they do that?
No, but both of us wore parachutes all the time we were flying gliders,
Yeah.
right? And every year I would go to Issaquah, that neat grass strip, and they would repack my chute a couple times a year. Every time I'd ask them, okay, what's the best way to get out of this glider, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but I never wanted to do it. I would have gone down with the airplane, I think, in preference to jumping out of it. But yeah, the other day, just some guy dropped without a parachute from 25,000 feet and landed in this net 200 feet across and lived. I don't know if he had a camera on his head. I hope he did.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that he didn't have a parachute, because I think most of those guys who do that jump still have a chute to finally land
Yeah,
on.
no, this is without a chute.
Yeah, you did it without a chute, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
Think of the airspeed.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, how's our time, Fred?
Yeah, just about an hour.
Is that about what you wanted? Okay.
Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Well, I gave a little talk to the pilots group a few years ago about soaring as a metaphor for life. And I think there are a lot of things in that talk and that little slide where soaring is a metaphor for life. One of which is don't overextend your final glide.
You know what, John?
Don't overextend your final glide.
Yeah.
Coming back in that first weekend, the Saturday, trying to get back to Ephrata, that might have been my final glide if I'd gone out over those volcanic rocks, but I wasn't sure of that. But
We were trying hard to resuscitate private flying to build up the demand for it, is the various organizations, the AOPA and all the local flying organizations, and the FAA have done some things very, very recently to help this
Yes.
situation by removing some of the demanding restrictions,
Yes,
and
such as with the medicals
yeah,
and with light sport.
yeah,
Yeah. But general aviation still is on the decrease, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
But it all started with I think it started with the expense of fuel and
Yes.
whatnot. But now fuel costs are going down dramatically. And also one of the big industrial forcing functions is predicted to be solar energy. We're using it for everything, and there are solar powered airplanes
Yes.
in a very experimental stage.
Yeah.
One, I don't know, one did finally make it around the world, didn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. So there's opportunity out there.
Well, for me, aviation has been a great passion and a very satisfying part of the other parts of my life. And you feel the same, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.